panel, and I'm going to go ahead and first introduce our speakers. Over to the far left is Alexandra Dean out of Eastern Illinois University. Next to her is Stevie Grimm. She's from Junction Union High School in Daly City, California. And next to me is Derek McGrath from Stony Brook University. And I will first go ahead and turn it over to Alexandra for her presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Allison. So today I'll be discussing and presenting digital literacy, and first I'll be walking you through what exactly digital literacy is, followed by some possible applications that I thought of that we can use manga, especially with a focus on the secondary level, which is high school. Can everybody hear me back there? Yeah. I think I can. How's that? Yeah. That's better? Okay. All right. So first we're going to go through what exactly is digital literacy. Let's get some definitions going in on that before we consider exactly how we can use manga to address the implications of digital literacy. So here we have Paul Gilster, and in his book, he wrote a book all the way back a long time ago for some of us, 1997. And this is his book. And so here's the early definition of digital literacy. He defined in an interview digital literacy as being the ability to understand information and, more importantly, to evaluate and integrate information in multiple forms using the computer. And he emphasized that this is really important. And when he talks to teachers and librarians, he emphasizes that you can't understand information you find on the internet without evaluating its sources and putting it in its context. So if you don't know where you got that information and exactly what uses it's for, it's not exactly going to be useful for you. And she also emphasized being able to evaluate and interpret information and encourage teachers and librarians to understand that internet users cannot use information found on the internet otherwise without understanding what it came from. He also highlighted the growing change, claiming that the internet rapidly evolved from being a rummage sale to something that more resembled a library, especially when we began to use URLs. And I put up here evaluation, interpretation, and placing in context. And that's something I'd like us to keep in mind as we move forward, especially when we get to the manga section on how we can continue to evaluate, interpret, and place in context. So following a little newer definition of digital literacy, as time has gone on, we have the book I have up here is Mastering Digital Literacy. And in it, there's this great essay. I put the title of the essay up there for you. And the writers, Rosenthal and Sylvia, they define digital literacy as being the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn, and say that that is the key to succeeding in the exponentially changing digitally landscape. So that means, really, it's not about, for example, learning with every single menu in Microsoft Word. I don't know about a lot of you, but when I was in high school, I was forced to learn every single command from memory, about where to cut, where to paste, where the smart art was, and now that that's all that's changed, that's not necessarily useful information anymore. So teaching students is a lot like that. We need to be focusing on how to gear them to prepare on the changing digital environment and new programs rather than memorizing every single function. So it's not a matter of how can I use this, but what can I use this tool for, and then learning how to use that tool. Also, additionally, I have another text up there, Why School? Will Richardson really pushed this idea about using this information in an efficient way. Also, think about Donald J. Liu, who wrote for Syracuse University, who wrote that regular change is a defining characteristic of new literacies. Things are constantly changing. This simple observation has profound consequences for literacy and literacy education. The continuously changing technologies of literacy means that we must help children learn how to learn new technologies of literacy. In fact, the ability to learn continuously changing technologies may be a more critical target than learning any particular technology of literacy itself. So keeping that in mind, I've gone ahead and I've put up here some very important aspects of maybe a new idea of digital literacy. Because this is important to consider what it is before we move on to manga. And I define digital media and digital literacy especially as being encompassing of all of the processes that one uses to construct, create, and interpret the impact of media. It is the practice of using new media to teach the necessary traditional skills of communication. The greatest thing about this evolving idea is that digital literacy encompasses more than just ebooks and social media articles. It also encompasses video games and even manga. So this is my equation of use, my suggested equation for how teachers necessarily go about implicating and putting manga and other forms in schools in the classroom. So first we have manga. Obviously, we're going to bring the manga into the classroom. And we'll get to what manga and how to select the manga shortly. We need to analyze the manga in the classroom. I'll get to the Common Core standards of the English classroom shortly and how we can go about following those. But first, I want you to kind of envision this as your former English classroom. Maybe you had group discussions, probably a lot of you, where you talked about the work, you went over what is symbolism, what can we pull out of those books. So those traditional literary skills that you would have learned in high school or maybe possibly still are learning in high school, I want you to keep that in mind and kind of imagine one of your favorite manga being in there. Next, and probably the most important part about this equation, is the actual digital literacy project. This is the assignment that the proposed teacher or professor would be coming up with to implement the manga in the classroom. I've offered some suggestions here. Twine is an interactive visual story. You can do a lot of different things with Twine to make it very interactive. You can make it collaborative depending on what kind of classroom it is that you would like to set up. I'll show you a book trailer here in a few minutes, but I'm really big on book trailers. I think it's great to be able to take a book, an entire manga even, and condense it down into something that it allows you to have the opportunity for your students and for yourself to think about how can I communicate what is the appeal of what it is I'm trying to show you. Because that's really the heart of communication. How can I get students in to enjoy these manga, and how can the students then turn around, make book trailers, and convince other students of the legitimacy of manga as a viable teaching subject. We also have the blog, of course. That's a traditional but continually evolving media. Nowadays, I don't know how many of you know, but we have a lot of learning platforms online that schools are consistently implementing, including Desire to Learn, Blackboard, just to name a few. And they allow for this collaborative process. You can have these private blogs, and everyone can learn in this more or less safe space how to construct a blog, how to go ahead and how much do we include this information, how much of the culture do we include about the manga versus how much do we include about the plot. And last but not least, we could even possibly do a video game adaptation of the manga, a storyboard, if you will, which allows the students to interact not only with the plot, but with the order of things, with understanding that relationship between text and visual media. That's my equation for really allowing the students, through creation, not necessarily lecturing like I am now. I gave you guys a small lecture of what digital media is. But imagine if I had gone ahead and said, envision your favorite manga, and then go forth and make something like this. Choose one of the following formats. And in doing so, you begin to learn not only how to read digital literacy, but you're learning digital literacy through creation. It allows you to think about your audience as being a consumer of what it is that you're designing and creating. Like going back to the book trailer, for example, you use the book trailer to go ahead and condense that manga into what is it about this manga that makes it fit for showing off the more interesting facets that the particular student likes about Japanese culture, or all the facets that go into that. I think that's a great way to approach digital literacy because it's an interesting way, it's very engaging, it allows every single process for the student and even the teacher, especially if you have the classroom set up so that they share their work and they give presentations. Imagine if everyone had a book trailer, we can all see what everyone did. And if everyone selected a different manga, we'd be exposed to quadruple the amount of manga. We have so much more information in little bite-sized forms to draw from and little paths to possibly explore through that preview of that collaborative learning process. So, moving on. So I touched upon earlier the Common Core standards. I've gone ahead, and I don't want to bore us all with Common Core standards, so I've really condensed. I've gone to the Common Core website, and I've pulled out some of the more or less the really important things through grades 9 through 12, all our typical high school levels, of how we can implement manga to fit those necessities. One of the Common Core standards for freshmen at the secondary level includes being able to analyze a particular point of view at the point of view or cultural experience reflected in a work of literature from outside of the United States, drawing on a wide reading of world literature. Again, we've got that emphasis on world literature and being able to read things from the perspective of outside the United States. Additionally, the Comic Core places an emphasis on research and media skills. There are many manga that provide ample opportunity for research on literary tradition, comic book style, and impact on both manga and on both Japan and in the world. So I think that students definitely need to be prepared to discuss and collaboratively analyze materials. I've put Bakuman up here because for me I think it's a great way to, it does go against the traditional manga style. A lot of manga, depending on whether it's shonen, typically manga for boys, or shoujo, manga for girls, there is a difference in how many words per page. The ratio of words to pictures is different. But I've found that Bakuman has a lot of text for a manga. There's a lot to read in that manga compared to usual mangas. And I think it would be great for students at the high school level because they just came out of middle school, and this is about 2 young middle school boys who, unlike the United States where our high school lines are divided by location, in Japan it's divided by performance. If you do well, you can go to the high school that you went well, you go to this high school. You have to score a certain amount to get into the specific high school you want to go to. So these 2 boys are very focused on becoming manga artists at a young age, and the industry kind of pushes them, you're only in middle school, you need to calm down. And I think that's great for high schoolers to read, not only because it's a challenging first read for a manga, but also because it showcases 2 young people really working to make their dreams happen. It just shatters this fantasy that success doesn't require hard work, which it does, and that's why I really enjoy this manga. It really fits in to the Comic Core standard of requiring students to pose and respond to questions that relate to current discussion. Students also are required to relate broader themes or larger ideas and actively incorporate others into the discussion, as well as to clarify, verify, or challenge ideas and conclusions. Manga, a lot of manga, and especially Bakuman, really will allow students to challenge conclusions. Is it enough to just say, oh, they're only 12, they shouldn't be working as hard as they are? I really like that it does that. I'll get to Mushishi here in 1 second. Another Comic Core standard is that students need to be able to respond thoughtfully to diverse perspectives. They need to be able to summarize points of agreement, disagreement. They need to be able to summarize, qualify, and justify their own views, and make new connections. That's really important. The ability to make new connections in light of evidence and reasoning. And I really think that Mushishi is a great fit for that because it allows the students to interact with a lot of the mythology and legend of Japan. I have a personal fondness for Mushishi, that's also true. Hits and spins. So, wrapping up here, I've got a couple of slides. This is Mushishi. I'll point out real quick that what I really think is interesting is that in the first volume, at one point, the child here is able to draw symbols, and kanji is all symbols. If you don't know the symbol for house, you can't read the word house. And so I really like that the manga has a lot, it draws a lot. And I won't get too deep into the philosophy, but I like this idea of text as, it's not necessarily a word. These symbols come to life. There's life inside the symbol, and so the symbols come to life. And that's not necessarily a trope you really see in a lot of English, American, especially literature, because our language is not symbol. I mean, it's sound and symbol, not just symbol, solely symbol-based, if that makes sense. I think this would be great in a classroom for Japanese folklore and mythology. I think that for symbolism, yesterday, I don't know if anyone attended the panel, but one of our presenters discussed fascism and Attack on Titan. That was really interesting, that he put up a picture of a general and a warship from Japan and then pulled out the Mikasa. That was a warship, apparently. I didn't know that before yesterday. So I think that'd be great. And Bakuman, as I touched upon, for introduction to manga, especially because of that slight learning curve. There's more words in Bakuman than the traditional manga. So if you can read Bakuman, you can go forth and read more manga. Now, I've got this little book trailer I'll show you, and then we'll wrap up. Apparently, sound? Okay. Well, yeah. As you notice here, there's a summary. This is roughly a little summary, 1 1-minute summary of the manga, about the whole series. So the idea is to get you in to read this manga, to watch this anime. It's like a tiny bite-sized advertisement. And if your students can take an entire manga and fit it into a 1-minute thing, demonstrating that they understand what's going on here, you know that they read the work. Not only that, but they can entertain each other with how they go about explaining this information to you. How is really a big word here. How do we go about talking about these things? I'm going to cut that short. Okay, blog news. We've got a couple blogs here. Pulled out some blogs, and we can talk about manga studies, the 10 books to own. Your students could do this. All of you could do this. We live in an age where we're all equally involved in learning. That shoujo manga blog, found that was cool. All right, thank you very much.
I'll just back up and fix the things. Hold on.
Hi, my name is Stevie Grimm. To introduce myself very quickly, I'm a high school teacher. I teach at Jefferson High School in Daly City up by San Francisco. I'm sure everybody in here went to high school at one point. And I don't know about you guys, but I hated high school.
I liked it.
Right, and so I went to high school at a time before manga and anime was really all
I
that
liked high
big.
school.
And so we were getting teased in high school for it, like there was no manga in the library. I had a teacher once tell me that it's not legitimate art, like all this kind of stuff in high school. And so when I graduated high school barely, I decided that I wanted to go back to high school and I wanted to do something a little bit different when I got there. And so it took me a little bit of time to get some traction to go back to school and become a high school teacher, but I did it. And so I work now, I teach history, and our school is Common Core. And what I noticed is that the school that I work at, we have a very, very, very high struggle. Like we have a lot of students struggling with literacy. We have a lot of students struggling to stay plugged into high school. And the biggest thing that we deal with at the school that I'm at is student apathy. And kids just not thinking that they can be successful, and kids not thinking that they can actually go to college and be something. And so what I've begun to do is trying to think of ways that we can incorporate anime and manga, but really all kinds of non-traditional text to create kids that are confident readers. And so that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So, but I hate reading. So I give a survey to my kids on the first day of school every year, and I ask them, do you like to read? And all of them are like, no, I hate reading. And they say it as they're like tweeting and Instagramming, and all these things that require so much reading, right? And so it's not so much that the kids hate reading, it's that they don't identify themselves as readers. And they don't identify the text that they're reading as text. Okay? They see Twitter, they see Instagram, they see anime, manga, they see the shows that they're watching, all of this stuff that they're interpreting and being critical about and discussing with their friends and having all of these really kind of in-depth critical discussions about. They don't see that as academic. And so what I'm going to talk a little bit of today is how do we get kids to see what they're doing as academic? And if we can create these confident readers, then we are going to create more academic students that think they can succeed, that think they have a place in academia, or really just in whatever they decide they want to do after high school. I was never college bound. I didn't want to go to college, and I felt like that was something that was maybe why I wanted to draw manga. That's what I wanted to do. And I felt like one of the reasons why I wasn't very successful in high school is that my teachers told me, like, if you don't go to college, you're going to die homeless and alone. And you're not going to, like, be anything. And so I was like, well, that's my track then, you know? And so, I didn't go back to college until I was 23 years old. And so, when I got there, I was like, wow, I didn't die in the last 5 years. I was able to do my own thing. And so, so I want to talk about validating student text and thus validating students, really. So I broke it down to 3 things. I'm going to try to get through this pretty quick so we can make sure everybody has time and so you guys can ask some questions. So I'm going to break down to 3 things that I think can help students become a little bit more confident. Number 1, the manga and anime can be used as familiar content to teach new skills. One of the biggest mistakes that teachers make is teaching a new skill and new content at the same time. It just holds students up for failure. If you want kids to learn about why, or what the argument between the United States and the Soviet Union was in the Cold War, right? And you want them to do that through a debate. But the kids don't know how to debate, and they don't know anything about the Cold War, right? They're going to be confused at the end of that lesson. They're not going to know anything about the Cold War, and they're not going to know anything about debating. So anime and manga can be used as a familiar bridge to teach the new skill that you need to use in order to get them to the place that you want to get them. So to give you kind of an example, I did a Civil War debate in my class. I teach U.S. history. I gave the Civil War debate, but before I did that, I put the class into 6 groups. And each group got a Pokemon, and every group had to figure out what Pokemon would win in a battle royale. And so, I did that. I don't remember. I think Magikarp won. I can't remember. No, the kids got crazy. I gave them a little skill card. And what I taught them there was, this is how you debate. This is how you're respectful. This is how you use evidence. This is how you, this is the arguments that the other teams are going to use. We had kids that wanted to make alliances with each other and all this stuff. They were taking down Charmander. And so, so they did that. They learned the skill. They learned how to debate. And they did it through a way that was fun and relatable. And even the kids that didn't understand Pokemon, what was cool about this was that the kids that were really into anime that maybe have been marginalized in schools forever, that have felt like they have never fit in anywhere, got to teach those kids something new. So all of these kids that walk into class sometimes and think, they're the most academic person in the class, or they're the smartest person in the class. Well, they had to learn from kids that maybe walked into classrooms sometimes and felt like, I've never been validated in this classroom before, and now I'm the smartest kid in the class. I'm the one that knows this. And so the kids really did get some validation out of that. So your anime and manga can be used to teach that skill. Then we took all of those things they learned in debate and they applied it to the Civil War. And so it was kind of a great segue into that, and they had a lot of fun with it. Manga and anime can be used to introduce abstract or complex concepts. There's a lot of concepts that kids have a really hard time grasping when you kind of give it to them this amorphous, oh, this happened in Germany somewhere, in 1852 or something. They have trouble grasping that. But a lot of these themes can actually be seen in popular manga and anime, and in really all popular culture. By introducing these concepts with relatable and fun text, students will begin to feel a sense of fluency. And when they get fluency, they're going to feel confident in their ability to use these concepts. So just to give you an example of one thing that I did, I was teaching how somebody can become a dictator, right? How do you rise to be a dictatorship? And I showed an episode of The Walking Dead, and I showed this episode with the governor. Yes. And there's this great scene where he gives this wonderful speech about Woodbury, and he's up on this truck, and he's we're a community and we're a family and all this stuff, and it's wonderful. And then he goes out and he shoots all these soldiers and takes all their weapons, right? There's this really interesting part of the episode where you have him and Michonne who are standing there, and she's like, give me my weapons back. And he's like, if you want your weapons, you can go, they're perfect, you can go get them. They're outside the wall. And when we were learning about how people rise to power and how dictators rise to power, we were able to look at the governor and really kind of see the way in which he was speaking, the way in which he was manipulating his people. And we were able to apply that to some more abstract concepts like, how does Hitler rise to power? How does Stalin rise to power? How do some of these other dictators rise to power? And so the kids felt very fluent going into it because they all watch Walking Dead. They all know about Walking Dead. They're like, wow, I know this ahead of time. I know this already. I know these concepts. I know these words. I know all of that. And so that was kind of a cool thing. The last one I want to talk about is using manga and anime as visual scaffolds for struggling readers. One thing that we deal with at my school quite a bit is that we have a lot of English language learners. We have a lot of struggling readers. And long and dense text can be intimidating. And it's especially intimidating to kids that are struggling. So visual text like manga and anime, the actual structure of manga and anime, gives students what we call a multi-modality way of reading. Students get to depend on text, students don't have to depend on text solely for their reading. They get to use what we use on a day-to-day basis to interpret meaning from one another. They get to use body language, they get to use tone, they get to use facial expressions. I was learning to speak Russian, and we had to do this assignment. We had to call our professor and ask him out on a date. And it was funny because I thought I was the best Russian speaker in the world. I was so excited about this. And I get on the phone and I don't know how to speak any Russian. And I'm like, because you don't have them in front of you, you're not looking, you don't realize how much we as people depend on each other and our body language in order to interpret meaning. And so when you give a manga to a kid or you give a comic book to a kid that's struggling with reading, they don't have to pull text or pull meaning solely from the words. They can look at the source. One thing I love to do is put up manga or anime, or I'll use manga for example, and get rid of all the words. And I have the kids have to tell me what's going on in the manga. And the kids can really interpret the entire story just by looking at the images without any of the words there. And what that does is it creates students who feel a little bit more confident in their reading abilities because they feel like they are on the same level as everybody else in class at that point. And when you can get them feeling that confidence, you're going to get them raising their hands more. You're going to get them feeling like it's a community where they are going to be able to feel safe in that environment and be able to read aloud and really kind of, you know, feel like they can accomplish this task, which has for so long been something that they have struggled with. So just my final thoughts real quick. I wanted to just go ahead and give you just a 1, 2, 3. Anime and manga can help students become more confident readers by delivering content in a relatable and digestible way. Helping students realize that many of the texts that they're already familiar with have a space in the academic environment. I didn't think manga and anime had any space in the academic environment. And then I went to college, I went to my master's program, and I'm like, wow, people are writing like theses on this, and it's amazing, you know? And so I'm like, wow, it's academic. You know, nobody told me that in high school. You know, and so that was really cool. So then what that does, if a kid can see what they love has a space in an academic environment, then they know that they have a space in an academic environment. And lastly, I just wanted to end with the fact that anime and manga are just some of the texts that can be used to create confident readers. You know, I've used hip hop, I use film, I use art, I use all kinds of video, whatever you can use to get the kids plugged in and make them feel fluent and confident is going to get them reading a little bit more. So, thank you guys.
I finished my PhD at Stony Brook University. I'm currently Director of Marketing and Communications for the Northeast Modern Language Association. And in my spare time, I'm on Tumblr every waking minute. So what I like about what we've had for the presentation so far and that tied them together is that we're all talking about creation and that's what students are. And in the wake of certain accusations online from certain critics about fan entitlement, we're seeing that that division between fan and creator is nebulous. And while the previous presentations have looked at creation in the classroom, I'm looking at creation as a way of then drawing something educationally out of it after it was already formed in an online format. So I've been running a fan site centered around the Japanese anime and manga Soul Eater. It ran from 2007 to 2013. A lot of it is centered on the Grim Reaper teaching students who can transform into weapons how to stop a global wave of madness that can assume the form of fear, greed, wrath, basically all of your deadly sins. As an action genre shonen, it's supposed to typically appeal to young male demographic. We know from our experience that shonen is not limited to just young boys, that we know that it is vast across gender and age. And that's one of the things that appealed to me so much as I was finishing my PhD in literature and gender studies was how this series was doing so much that was productive regarding representations of gender and sexuality, at the same time that it was really frustrating trying to work through the problems in the series. So the series has a large female audience. It includes elements that would appeal to studies of gender and sexuality, including main courses on those topics. This includes gender bending, albeit through magic. It includes characters who are gender neutral, agender, lesbian, bisexual, female characters who have a variety of roles as thieves, assassins, soldiers, witches, who defy orders, who have autonomy, who think for themselves, who overcome mental, emotional, and physical difficulties. The image above is from the prequel to the series, which does feature a dream sequence of one of the canonically queer characters, Jacqueline, dreaming about kissing her teammate Kim. And it's treated largely respectful. It's not treated as some fan service for titillation. That changes when you get to the last chapter of Soul Eater, which is supposed to be a bookend to the very first chapter, which is almost not wall-to-wall fan service, but just frustrating fan service. So, a global wave of madness spreads that is called the madness of breast, which leads to this, and this, and this. This is an 18+ session, so there is something. Our character on the left side, Black Star, explains that he can train while being a peeping Tom and staring at someone naked to achieve greatness. Right, it's a funny moment. What these examples have in common is that it's an objectification of female characters who in all of these scenes are largely silent about what is being experienced, which is the male characters being voyeurs to them. We do have a moment of one of the female characters, Patty, groping her older sister's breast as figuring out, okay, so I'm under this madness of fan service as well. It's a bit frustrating given that the series has largely been able, in between the first and last chapters, to avoid a lot of these one-note jokes. When it did so, it was in terms of allowing certain characters, such as Blair, who we can see a few panels earlier, is actually a cat who can assume humanoid form, that there is another depth to the character and allows for more forms of slapstick in the series. With that in mind, they were able to do a kind of Tom and Jerry-esque joke in one of the middle chapters that showed that the series creator, Atsushi Okubo, is able to do these kind of gags. However, at the same time as he has these very productive gender representations, he then throws in jokes that I find to be a bit tired and cliche and are basically trolling the audience. And that's why the nickname online for him is Troll Kubo. Now, there is a gender disparity, and this is where we can allow students to jump in and create assignments that respond to it by having them create their own manga or changing the word balloons to show something new in the text. Sometimes it's ironic, sarcastic, or sometimes it shows another path that the creator could have taken. And that's the challenge I present on my site and I try to present in the classroom is instead of being fan entitlement, if there is such a thing, how do we as fans appropriate a text and revise it to take a road not taken, to take a different approach? So instead of complaining that we didn't like how a story worked, we can figure out, could this change even be possible? And if it could be, great. If it can't, then we're still stuck with a complaint without having a clear answer. Now, there is a gender disparity in the series. Most of the fan service I have found has been centered on female characters. There are 2 exceptions that do involve a naked dance and one person showering. What I've noticed was the other disparity between the 2 series. Soul Eater had its original run in 2008 and then had a prequel in 2014. In between the 2 versions of the series, we had a change in style. The original Soul Eater was a very gothic action comedy with a lot of darkness. On the left, we have our protagonist, Maka Albarn, and you can see that the outline to Maka's face is what's called pig-nosed, and it's supposed to resemble a human skull. That's the kind of gothic aesthetic the series has. Its prequel, Soul Eater Not, was a slice-of-life romantic comedy, largely based around a school, so it has a more moe style that includes permanent blush stickers on all female characters, regardless their personalities. That kind of gendered appearance across the board was surprising, especially because the previous series could have Maka look downright homicidal, whereas the prequel had her look still threatening and aggressive, but definitely not the same gothic aesthetic. On my website, Soul Dwelling, on Tumblr, we had talked a bit about it, and one person wrote that it was the constant blushing of every female that bothers me. I agreed, and I responded. And then it got worse. And then it became worse. And I lost my place in the presentation. So I'm discussing blush stickers here as they pertain to only Soul Eater and its prequel. I don't want to suggest that across the board, this is always how blush stickers operate. It's going to change by series. We know from what we have seen in various shows, including new ones like My Hero Academia, that the presence of blush stickers does not undermine the badassness of a character. It doesn't undermine their complexity. A character like Yuraka can still be very innocent, as shown by her blush stickers. That doesn't compromise her ability to be a fighter and be effective in combat. It still does leave me wondering a bit how would things change differently.
Oh no!
I am going to Chris Sabat's talk. So if that happened, that would be great. Okay. Also, a little plug, and then I'll be able to wrap up this presentation. If you go down to Artist Alley, there's someone there, Atomic Mangoes, and if you check their Tumblr page, they were commissioned by someone, and I just happened to see the artwork during the con, where they added blush stickers to both characters and still kept the integrity of who these characters were. Fan creation is a practice we can use in the classroom with something just like Photoshop to show a student how can you change something in a discussion. And all of this was emerging just from a random Tumblr page that I created. It is functioning off of internet memes, it is functioning off a lot of joke humor, but it is still something that helps dispel and calm down a lot of discussions around gender and sexuality, especially when you have the stereotype, I think a fictional one, of the social justice warrior. This shows there is a sense of humor to feminism and gender studies, and to act like there isn't is an absolute lie. What I want to wrap up with is that we do know that blush stickers are gender neutral. And if there was an idea for a subsequent assignment that we could give our students, it would be costume changes. Some of my colleagues have discussed how would you revise an outfit. We have seen that with cosplay. And this is one of the points I want to make. That when we see cosplay, even as we recognize the original text might have a problematic outfit, at no point do we criticize a cosplayer, because that is not fair. A person deciding to put on an outfit is by their own decision, and they are doing something with that work of art. When a creator puts it together, that's a little more dodgy because the character themselves may not have had a say in how they are represented. We have an example with Momo from My Hero Academia, where her ability depends on having exposed skin in order to produce objects that she can pull out of her skin. It makes sense her outfit would be more revealing. It doesn't make as much sense in terms of combat when we have seen more revealing outfits, such as the one on the right, that are still not turning into so much fan service. This artwork is by Easy Art, who gave permission for me to present this to this presentation. Please check out their Tumblr for more information, as they were writing a letter to the creator as this part of collaborative fan art to say, what can be done better to redesign a costume that still keeps the abilities and the character's integrity, especially as they emphasize this being an underage character and finding it problematic both for a Japanese and North American audience. So there are still other points I could address, such as a new manga that has come out from the Soul Eater creator and was just announced as licensed here at AnimeExpo, Fire Force, has a similar problem where a character's abilities depend on exposed skin, but then it just turns into cliched fan service jokes of uninvited groping. It gets pretty dull after a while. What can we then do as educators, not only in the classroom, but online? We have to keep encouraging fan arts, cosplay, role play, and fan fiction, because these are covering areas of discussion that we don't get to see covered in a lot of pop culture. Which gaps can they fill that would allow us to fix something that we see as a problem in a text instead of only complaining about it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it looks like we have a couple of minutes for questions. The first time.